So for example, in a dream, we get the sense of inhabiting a world in which we are knowing a slice of that world. I can see people and I can interact with some people and have a vague idea of an entire vast unknown world all around me. But when I wake up, the whole thing, the known slice of that world and the entire so-called unknown world would still be a dreamt world in the whole thing. And exactly like that, in the waking state, we have slices of knowledge and a vast unknown all around us, but the whole thing as known and unknown, both being still in consciousness. I mean, you can't step out of consciousness at any point.
Maybe there's an argument that there has to be something at least. I mean, I would normally think of this as an argument there has to be something at least beyond my consciousness.
Yes.
To explain why the tree is still there, has to be something beyond my consciousness. Maybe it's your consciousness, maybe it's God's consciousness, maybe it's a physical world, but there has to be something beyond my consciousness. But I guess another view is that, hey, well, maybe my consciousness is bigger than what I know, to bring in the distinction with knowledge.
Right.
And then I guess I would just say, okay, well, now there has to be something beyond, let's call it my known consciousness, the aspects of my consciousness that I am aware of. And instead of saying the extra part is God's consciousness, maybe you could say the extra part is an aspect of my consciousness that I don't know about. And that's what's underlying all this. And I don't know which of these would be closer to the...
I think the Advaita view is exactly why it's the same argument they have against the subjective idealists, which in the Advaita case were the Buddhists. I think that in the Advaita view, it would be they in fact argued very strongly against the subjective idealists, who were the Buddhist philosophers about 1500 years ago, who seemed to be saying exactly what Berkeley was saying. And the Advaitins did not agree with them. That was surprising because they seemed to be saying similar things, that things are in consciousness. And the Advaitins said, no, it's not my consciousness. It's not, the world is not an imagination in your mind, the way a dream might be an imagination in your mind. So the world does exist apart from your mind. But then they talked about a global consciousness in which all minds were appearing and known as the unknown. And that's fascinating. Let me see the chat, because we had promised our audience here. If you're okay, could we go to the questions in the chat? I think we're just about 10 minutes left. There is Alpana Chatterjee who's saying, Professor, how would you define consciousness? So that's a global question.
That's such a big question. But it's hard to define these, give definitions for these big philosophical terms. But I always like an expression that my colleague Tom Nagel, who Swami mentioned, used, which is, is there something it's like to be a bat? What is it like to be a bat? We don't know what a bat's consciousness is like, but we think there's something it's like to be a bat. So we can say now a being is conscious if there's something it's like to be that being. Maybe there's something it's like to be me. Maybe there's nothing it's like to be this cup. So you're conscious if there's something it's like to be you, and your conscious state is what it is like to be you at a given time. Maybe that conception of consciousness is as good as any, at least as a starting point.
That was another central paper in the philosophy of mind. What is it like to be a bat? Thomas Nagel. Yeah. If I could give the Advaitic definition of consciousness, it's a sort of negative definition. It says consciousness defines it as not this. So whatever you can designate as this in your experience, this table, this hand, this thought, that's not consciousness. That's all appearing to consciousness. So it's sort of in the indirect way of pointing back towards consciousness. Here is Rekha Kalekar. She's asking, Professor, isn't consciousness that which enables one to become aware of the physical and virtual reality? If that's the case, and how can physical and virtual reality be apart from consciousness? So if you're aware of physical reality and virtual reality, in fact, everything you're aware of them in consciousness, and there's no way you can step outside consciousness, to see them separately. You can't, let's put it this way. If whatever we are aware of, it's always in consciousness and you can't separate the two, then doesn't this point to everything being sort of in consciousness, or they don't exist apart from consciousness?
Yeah, it's interesting, but you yourself have been making this distinction between awareness, consciousness, and the contents of consciousness. And to me, that at least leaves open the idea, okay, maybe the contents of consciousness are just part of consciousness, but hey, they could be something distinct from consciousness that consciousness makes you aware of. And I'm at least, I think some dualists, for example, would say, well, yeah, there is a mental world of consciousness. There's a physical world that's not a world of consciousness, but consciousness is like this relation, this arrow, this ray that gives us, enables us to become aware of something outside itself. I have to confess, I quite like this view of consciousness as a way of something. It's a way of knowing something outside itself. It could be that all we're knowing is just more consciousness. I'm open to that idea, but I quite like the idea that there's something outside of consciousness that we actually become aware of through consciousness.
That just reminded me about something being external to consciousness, which we become aware of through consciousness.